Welcome back to Top 10 Scary Urban Legends, and first and foremost, Happy Valentine's Day. Whether you're in love or not, you know this day is all about that and you can't do anything about it. So I'm gonna change it up a bit and introduce the top 10 scary Valentine's Day stories that you won't believe. I'm your host Andrew, and let's get right into this. At a number 10 spot, we have the Martyr of Saint Valentine. We couldn't do this video without the inspiration to the holiday, Saint Valentine himself. The legend himself lived during the rule of Emperor Claudius II in Rome around 270 AD, but he unfortunately met the tragic end of being beheaded. So how did this saint end up associating with love? So Emperor Claudius, who was involved in many unpopular and bloody campaigns during his reign, had lots of trouble getting soldiers to join his army because of their strong attachment to their wives and their families. To solve this problem, he decided to ban all marriages and engagements in Rome. Problem solved, right? Well, not really. Valentine, who was a holy priest, defied the emperor's decree and continued to perform marriages for young couples in secret. But when Valentine's actions were eventually discovered, he was arrested and beheaded on February the 14th. Valentine was said to have left a farewell note for the jailer's daughter, who had become his friend, and signed it, quote, "From your Valentine." For his actions, he was named a saint after his death, and ever since, February 14 has been all about love. And if you ever want to give thanks to this man, you can actually see his real skull in Rome, so you can just go there and just say Happy Valentine's Day. I bet he would appreciate it. Number 9, the 1945 bombing of Prague. On Valentine's Day in 1945, the United States Air Force made a tragic mistake that would forever be remembered in Czech history. During World War II, strategic bombing was considered a crucial component of warfare by military theorists who believed it could bring a swift end to the conflict by paralyzing the enemy's will to fight. The British and American Air Forces followed this theory very closely, with thousands of tons of bombs being dropped on German cities at the time. However, on that fateful day in February, a navigational error caused by bad weather led to 62 B-17 flying fortresses to drop 152 tons of bombs on Prague instead of their intended target, Dresden. The raid lasted less than 10 minutes and left 701 people dead and 2,000 homes completely destroyed or damaged. Some of the pilots were aware of their mistake but were bound by strict orders to maintain radio silence. Other famous buildings such as the Faust House in Charles Square and a Vinohrady synagogue were also damaged in the attack. The bombing of Prague was used for propaganda purposes by both the Germans and the communists at the time. The German propaganda described it as an Anglo-American terrorist raid, while the communist propaganda used it as an anti-American tool. The bombing of Prague remains a painful memory that is remembered every single year, with a Remembrance Act held in honor of the victims. The tragic events of February 14th, 1945 serve as a reminder of the devastating impact that war can have on innocent lives and communities. At our number 8 spot, we have the Stardust nightclub fire. On February 14th, 1981, the Stardust nightclub in Dublin was the site of a devastating tragedy. On this Valentine's Day, 841 people had gathered at the club for a regular disco party, as they thought. But on this lucky night, a fire broke out in the roof space above them. The fire started when the roofing materials melted due to the heat, but the partygoers didn't initially notice the fire because the music was far too loud. When people finally realized what was happening, a panic broke out as soon as they tried to escape. But the emergency exits were padlocked, the windows were sealed, and there was an excessive amount of tables and chairs blocking the way out. Despite the efforts of emergency responders, many of the people inside the club perished due to the smoke and flames. At the time, the fire was ruled as arson, but decades later, the families of the victims were calling for a new inquest as there was a lack of evidence to support the initial arson findings. But on that fateful day, 48 people died and 200 were injured, leaving a lasting impact on the city of Dublin and the families of those affected. At our number 7 spot, we have the Valentine's Day Massacre. The years between 1924 and 1930 saw the Windy City transform into one of the largest centers of gang activity in the entire United States. The ratification of the 18th Amendment, which ushered in prohibition, gave rise to bootlegging and presented many gangs with an opportunity to make money and even form connections with their cities. Now let's fast forward to the morning of February 14th, 1929, a day that would go down as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Two men dressed as police officers stormed a warehouse in Chicago's North Side, where they lined up 7 men in front of a wall as if it was a routine police raid. But this was no ordinary raid. The 2 fake police officers were soon joined by 2 others dressed as civilians, and they all pulled out machine guns and other weapons from their jackets before open firing. In just a matter of minutes, 70 bullets were fired, leaving all 7 men dead or dying on the floor, soaked in their own blood. The warehouse belonged to George Bugs Morin, who was the leader of the Northside Gang, which was a rival to the notorious gangster Al Capone. Morin's gang was the only thing standing in the way of Al Capone's crime syndicate, as it sought to dominate all gang activity in the entire city of Chicago. However, when news of the massacre broke later that day, all suspicions fell immediately on Capone. Frank Hawk Gussenberg, Morin's enforcer, was the only one still alive when law enforcement arrived at the scene, but he refused to reveal anything before he died from his injuries several hours later. Morin himself, who wasn't present at the warehouse at the time, said that only Capone kills like that when he was informed of the incident. It is suspected that Morin was the intended target of the massacre, but he arrived later than the others and fled the scene upon seeing the fake police officers entering the warehouse. Capone himself was in Florida at the time, giving him an ironclad alibi. No one was ever arrested or tried for these crimes due to the lack of concrete evidence, but the massacre was eventually attributed to Capone's gang. The incident effectively diminished Morin's influence in the Chicago gang circuit, leaving Capone to completely dominate the city through his syndicate until he was arrested and convicted of tax evasion in 1931. Number 6, the murder of Jodine Serrin. In the early hours of Valentine's Day in 2007, Art and Lois Serrin visited their daughter Jodine at her condo, only to discover a scene straight out of a nightmare. Jodine, who suffered from mental disabilities, was lying dead on her bed, having been beaten and strangled. What was even more shocking was that the Serrins had actually interrupted the killer in act of having intercourse with their daughter just moments before, having to wait in another room while he quickly dressed and fled. The perpetrator managed to slip away before the couple realized what had happened. The killer was never caught or identified despite the collection of DNA evidence from the crime scene. The brutal murder of Jodine Serrin continues to haunt her parents to this day, as they continue to struggle to come with terms with the loss of her daughter and the cruel and senseless way in which she was taken from them. Overall, this is a crazy tragedy because it went from people thinking that she was in love to people realizing that she was actually dead. In the hump for our list, we have the murder of the Rundle family. In 1985, a Valentine's Day present turned into a horror story. Cassandra Rundle and her 2 children, Detrick and Melanie, were found brutally murdered in their home. Cassandra was assaulted, beaten, and strangled to death, while Melanie had a fractured skull and was strangled in her own bedroom. Detrick was found dead with a bloody hockey stick behind him, and the investigation revealed that Detrick had likely returned home while the murders were still in progress. Cassandra had recently placed personal ads in a local newspaper and received over 80 responses from men. Investigators followed up on these leads, but no evidence linked any of the men to the crime. Another suspect was Philip E. Wilkinson, a former soldier on death row for the 1992 triple slaying of a mother and her 2 children. The Rundle murders bore similarities to Wilkinson's case, but he was never connected to the case in the end of the day. The Rundle's family's tragic end remains unsolved for more than 30 years and has been one of Colorado Springs' most notorious crimes, and it definitely scares many people to this day. The community still talks about the case and shares stories, theories, and potential suspects. A local historian has even offered tours of the Rundle family home, which remains vacant and abandoned if you guys want to visit. Unfortunately, the case still remains a mystery and the victim's family has yet to find justice. At our number 4 spot, we have the disappearance of Marcy Jo Andrews. On Valentine's Day in 1984, Marcy Jo Andrews, a 24-year-old woman, attended a party with 2 friends in Chicago, and on the way back, the driver, Casey Nowacki, crashed into a viaduct, causing Andrews to injure her ankle. Nowacki then took Andrews to the hospital in a taxi, while Andrews' friends stayed in Nowacki's car waiting for a tow truck. However, when the friends tried to call Nowacki's apartment to check up on Andrews, he claimed that she had left and refused to let them in. When the police got involved, Nowacki repeated the same story and denied any knowledge of Andrews' whereabouts. 16 years later, in the year 2000, Nowacki was charged with Andrews' murder. The prosecution argued that he took Andrew back to his apartment, drugged her with THC, assaulted her, and later murdered her. Several witnesses testified to having seen Andrews in Nowacki's apartment, with one witness claiming to have seen Andrews handcuffed to a radiator and then lying dead on the floor. The prosecution also argued that Nowacki gave Andrews a THC overdose and disposed of her body. Nowacki's defense team countered the prosecution claims, arguing that witnesses were unreliable due to their criminal backgrounds and even offered deals in exchange for their testimony. However, Nowacki was still convicted of assault and murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. To this day, Andrews' body was never found, and the case remains one of Chicago's most famous unsolved murders, and it's just crazy to think how many tragic events occurred on this lovable day. Number 3, the picnic at Hanging Rock. The story of Picnic at Hanging Rock tells of the mysterious disappearance of schoolgirls Miranda, Marianne, Irma, and their teacher Miss McCraw on Valentine's Day 1900. The legend goes that the schoolgirls were drawn to the rock formation by supernatural forces. They then became dazed and confused and were lost within the boulders and crevices. And this is when they were never heard from again. The story originates from a novel by Joanne Lindsay, who gave ambiguous answers when asked whether the story was fact or fiction. And the hauntingly unnerving film only intensified the legend. To this day, many people believe that disappearances were real, which still lures people to the area, much like the girls are lured to this rock. But be sure to be on the lookout, because if you do decide to visit this area, chances are you're probably gonna run into one of these 4 people. Number 2, the discovery of Julie Valentine. In 1990, Glenn Hayward was on a mission to find wildflowers for his wife for Valentine's Day. As he walked through a field behind a mall in Greenville, South Carolina, he came across a Sears vacuum cleaner box emitting a foul odor. To his horror, he discovered the decomposing body of a newborn infant girl inside of the box. Investigators estimated that the infant had been born healthy and cared for before dying about 2 days after her birth. And this is because traces of food were still found inside of her stomach. Her umbilical cord was still attached and the placenta was also inside of the box. Despite an investigation, authorities were unable to identify the child or determine the cause of the death. The infant was then named Julie Valentine, and the case still remains unsolved. The only lead was a reported sighting of a man inside a red Pontiac Fiero parked at the site 3 days before the infant was found. But it's really unclear if this man had any sort of connection to this case. Until the child's identity can be established, she will forever be known as Julie Valentine. Number 1, the murder of Billy Trimbach. Valentine's Day can bring love and happiness, but for some people, it can only mean tragic endings. In 1992, Billy and Cindy Trimbach tied the knot, but their first anniversary ended in Billy's tragic death. His body was found shot by the side of a frontage road far away from their home in Stoneham, Colorado. Oddly enough, the same sheriff who investigated the case happened to drive past the spot where Billy's body was found. The sheriff remembered seeing multiple vehicles there, potentially driving past the killer as they disposed of Billy's body. The investigation led authorities to suspect Cindy Trimbach, who had collected a $500,000 life insurance policy on her husband's death. Cindy's car was found with physical evidence that suggested Billy's body had been there at some point. This made her the prime suspect in Billy's murder. The cloud of suspicion forced Cindy to move to Butte, Montana with her son James from a previous marriage. Then in April 1994, a Butte newspaper ran an article about Billy Trimbach's murder, which mentioned Cindy as a suspect. James was teased about this on the school playground by a classmate named Jeremy Bullock. James then responded by pulling out a gun and shooting Jeremy to death. He was sent to a juvenile home for the crime as a result. Cindy died of natural causes in 1996, but rumors continued to spread that she hired someone to carry out Billy's murder. At least one drug dealer reportedly bragged about being involved in the murder. However, the full truth about this case will still remain a mystery. Well, these are the top 10 scary Valentine's Day stories that you won't believe. What do you guys think about this list? Leave a comment down below with your thoughts, and be sure to give us a like and subscribe if you liked our videos. I'm your host Andrew, and I hope you guys have a scary day.